Welcome, honored viewers, to another epic journey into the deep shadows of the past. In the 13th century, the mighty Mongol Empire conquered the known world with unmatched fury. Yet their invincible cavalry met a horrifying nightmare in the dense jungles of the south. Nature itself and brilliant guerrilla tactics crushed the greatest war machine in human history. How did tiny nations break the unbreakable Mongol will? Let us uncover this brutal truth. By the year 1279, the great Kublai Khan had finally crushed the southern Song dynasty. Sitting upon his lavish throne, the emperor of the world gazed upon a massive map of Asia. His endless ambition drove him to look further south, towards the rich lands of Dai Viet and Champa. According to ancient records, these small kingdoms controlled the incredibly wealthy spice trade routes. Controlling these southern waters would grant the Mongol Empire total global dominance and wealth. The great Khan issued a terrifying imperial edict, demanding total submission from the south. But the proud rulers of Dai Viet and Champa fiercely refused to bow before the Mongol warlords. Enraged by this defiance, Kublai Khan ordered the mobilization of a massive invasion force. Hundreds of thousands of fierce warriors gathered across the endless, sunlit northern steppes. Clad in gleaming iron armor, the legendary Mongol cavalry prepared for massive conquest. They were the undisputed masters of open warfare, having crushed empires from China to Europe. Thousands of strong war horses thundered across the plains, creating an unstoppable wave of pure steel. Massive siege engines and thousands of warships were constructed to ensure total dominance. Mongol commanders, arrogant and battle-hardened, laughed at the thought of fighting jungle peasants. They believed that no force on earth could withstand the devastating charge of their heavy cavalry. The imperial banners, bearing the terrifying falcon crest, were raised high against the bright blue sky. A sea of deadly weapons gleamed under the harsh sun, promising swift defeat to any who resisted. Historical texts suggest that this was one of the largest invasion fleets ever assembled by man. The ground shook violently as the unstoppable war machine finally began its southern march. They left behind the familiar cold winds, heading straight into a completely unknown environment. The Mongol generals expected a swift and glorious victory, just like all their previous campaigns. Little did they know that they were marching directly into a green hell that would swallow them whole. The transition from dry plains to damp tropical forests marked the beginning of their endless nightmare. As the mighty army crossed the border, the dark skies above seemed to warn of the coming disaster. Heavy storm clouds gathered, replacing the bright sunshine with a deeply suffocating atmosphere. The mighty conquerors were about to face an enemy that could not be vanquished with a simple sword. If you were a Mongol soldier facing this unknown green hell, would you still march forward to your dark fate? The answer lay hidden within the terrifying depths of the dark, mosquito-infested southern jungles. Kublai Khan waited in his grand palace, fully expecting to receive the crowns of fallen kings. But destiny had prepared a vastly different outcome for his seemingly invincible armada. By the summer of 1285, the massive Mongol columns plunged deep into the dense rainforests. The stifling heat and severe humidity quickly began to suffocate the northern warriors. Heavy iron armor, once a symbol of their absolute power, now became a deadly, rust-covered prison. The proud Mongol commanders gasped for air, wildly hacking through thick vines with their heavy curved blades. Ancient historians note that a terrifying sickness known as malaria quickly swept through the camps. Giant tropical mosquitoes swarmed in the shadows, spreading a deadly fever that broke the strongest men. The invincible soldiers now shivered violently in the mud, their skin pale and dripping with cold sweat. Their once mighty war horses, bred for the open steppes, sank deeply into the treacherous gray swamps. Thousands of majestic beasts perished tragically from starvation, insect bites, and the poisonous air. The once glorious army was forced to abandon their heavy siege weapons in the endless thick mud. Famine began to strike as their massive supply lines stretched dangerously thin across the dense jungle. Valuable food spoiled instantly in the damp heat, leaving the starving troops to eat roots and rotten grain. The proud warriors were reduced to limping ghosts, using their rusted spears as fragile walking sticks. Fear and paranoia infected the ranks as they constantly marched through the thick, terrifying fog. The dense canopy above completely blocked the sun, trapping them in an endless, horrifying twilight. Desperate and exhausted, the Mongol forces finally managed to reach the capital city of Tanglong. They expected a massive, glorious battle to finally end their suffering and claim their grand prize. But instead of an army, they found a completely deserted city, devoid of any food or people. The brilliant Dai Viet leaders had employed a devastating scorched-earth tactic against the invaders. Every single grain of rice and drop of clean water had been carefully removed or completely destroyed. Standing in the empty palaces, the Mongol generals realized they had fallen into a massive trap. Their grand victory was hollow, providing absolutely no relief for their starving and fading soldiers. The mighty conquerors were now completely trapped in a hostile land, slowly fading away in the mud. Dai Viet scholars proudly recorded this masterful strategy of starving the enemy to ruin. The psychological toll was immense, as the northern warriors realized they could not fight the shadows. Their morale completely collapsed, replaced by a desperate, primal urge to simply survive the day. Sickness claimed more lives than any sword, filling the empty streets of Tanglong with silent, fallen souls. The invincible Mongol aura was slowly dissolving into the wet, crimson-stained southern soil. Meanwhile, the resilient Dai Viet forces waited patiently in their hidden jungle fortresses. They allowed the brutal tropical environment to slowly wear down and destroy the massive force. The southern warriors, fully camouflaged with mud, watched their enemies suffer with cold, calculating eyes. They knew the terrain perfectly, utilizing every river and hidden path to their advantage. When the Mongol forces were finally at their weakest, the true, fierce counterattack suddenly began. Ghostly figures emerged from the thick green foliage, launching lightning-fast, devastating guerrilla strikes. Poisoned arrows rained down from the trees, swiftly silencing the exhausted invaders before they could react. The heavy Mongol cavalry was completely useless in this chaotic, tightly packed green wilderness. Small, highly mobile Dai Viet units struck the supply ships, burning them down to the waterline. Panic spread through the Mongol ranks as they realized they were being hunted like animals in a cage. They desperately tried to retreat, but every path was heavily trapped with sharp bamboo spikes and deep pits. The hunters had become the hunted, and the legendary Mongol war machine was fading away in the dark. By the spring of 1288, the remaining Mongol commanders made a desperate, final decision. Unable to hold their ground, they ordered a massive naval retreat down the treacherous Bach Dang River. Thousands of heavy warships, packed with terrified and sick soldiers, slowly navigated the muddy waters. The supreme Dai Viet commander, Tran Hung Dao, watched coldly from the misty banks, his trap fully set. He had ordered his men to plant thousands of massive, iron-tipped wooden stakes deep into the riverbed. At high tide, these deadly, jagged spikes were perfectly hidden beneath the murky, fast-flowing water. Small, incredibly fast Dai Viet vessels suddenly appeared, harassing the giant Mongol fleet. Enraged and desperate, the Mongol captains blindly pursued these tiny ships right into the deadly trap. Would you have fallen for this tactical retreat? Or would you have seen through the deadly river trap? As the massive Mongol armada advanced, the tide suddenly began to recede with terrifying speed. The hidden wooden stakes violently tore through the heavy wooden hulls of the enormous northern warships. The sound of splintering wood and desperate cries echoed wildly across the mist-covered river. Giant vessels were hopelessly impaled, helplessly tilting and sinking into the dark, churning muddy waters. Fire arrows rained down from the banks, turning the trapped Mongol fleet into a massive, blazing inferno. Thousands of heavily armored soldiers fell into the deep river, dragging them down to their watery dooms. The terrified survivors quickly clung to burning debris, gasping for air amidst the total chaos. Bare-chested Dai Viet militias leaped onto the sinking ships, fiercely engaging in brutal engagements. Their short bamboo spears easily pierced the rusted, weakened armor of the exhausted Mongol warriors. The Supreme Commander stood victorious, his eyes reflecting the burning remains of the enemy fleet. The once mighty conquerors of the world were completely decimated in a muddy southern river. According to royal chronicles, the Bach Dang River literally turned red with crimson hues. This brilliant tactical masterpiece completely destroyed the fleeing fleet, leaving almost no survivors. The greatest naval disaster in Mongol history had just unfolded before the very eyes of the world. Those who somehow managed to escape the river trap were ruthlessly hunted down in the thick jungles. The legendary Mongol horde was finally broken, shattered by the genius of guerrilla warfare. The thick jungle swallowed the remaining terrified survivors of the great northern horde. Covered in thick mud and dark, dried crimson stains, they slowly dragged their broken bodies back to the north. They left behind their shiny weapons, completely traumatized by the brutal southern warfare. The invincible aura of the mighty Khans was forever buried beneath the dark waters. Dai Viet militia stood silently in the mist, watching their enemies fade into nothing. Similar disasters awaited the Mongol fleets that sailed towards the distant island of Java. Once again, tropical heat, deadly diseases, and fierce local resistance destroyed the invaders. The grand dream of total global domination was violently stopped by the brutal tropics. Back in the imperial capital, a heavy silence fell upon the once glorious golden throne room. Messengers arrived, trembling with pure fear, delivering the devastating news of total defeat. The aging emperor, Kublai Khan, sat motionless as he absorbed the shocking, massive disaster. His grand imperial vision had been ruthlessly shattered by a group of simple jungle peasants. He tightly gripped his wooden cane, his fierce eyes suddenly filled with dark shadows of immense regret. The absolute limits of the magnificent Mongol Empire were finally drawn in crimson and mud. No amount of heavy iron or brilliant tactics could conquer the fierce tropical elements. The mighty steppes had birthed a conqueror, but the southern jungles forged an unbreakable national shield. This monumental victory echoed across the globe, proving that the brutal Mongol forces could fall. Small independent kingdoms realized that tactical brilliance could defeat overwhelming numbers. The legendary Battle of Bach Dang became a timeless symbol of fierce national survival. Historians reflect on this immense tragedy as the true turning point of medieval warfare. It stands as a chilling reminder that human arrogance is always punished by the forces of nature. The ghosts of the fallen northern warriors still haunt the foggy, quiet banks of the ancient river. While the great Mongol Empire eventually crumbled, the fierce spirit of the southern people survived. They rebuilt their sacred temples and burned villages from the ashes of the devastating conflict. The deeply rooted trees of Dai Viet continued to grow, fueled by the essence of the fallen invaders. Kublai Khan never recovered from this massive loss, carrying the bitter shame until his final breath. His dark, hollow eyes constantly stared southward, haunted by the brutal memories of the Green Hell. The relentless expansion of the mighty northern horde was permanently stopped in its fateful tracks. Future generations would always remember the incredible courage of the fierce defenders. Their brilliant use of harsh terrain and fierce weather proved far deadlier than any forged metal weapon. History teaches us that the strongest empires often collapse under the weight of their own ambition. The silent, muddy rivers of the south held the ultimate power to drown the greatest kings of Earth. As the sun sets over the ancient battlefield, we honor the incredible resilience of the soul. The story of the Mongol defeat in the tropics remains a fascinating chapter of past history. A powerful tale of brilliant strategy, extreme survival, and the undeniable might of nature. The legacy of those independent southern warriors continues to inspire brave people today. Their amazing victory perfectly illustrates the absolute triumph of wisdom over force. The Mongols learned that raw muscle can never defeat the unyielding spirit of a united people. Was Kublai Khan a blind tyrant, or merely a victim of brutal nature? Share your thoughts below. If you enjoyed this epic journey, please like this video, share it, and subscribe to our channel.